Hi, welcome to another edition of This Issue. My guest this time is Amory Weld from Brunswick, who's with a group called Transition Greater Brunswick. Welcome to the show.
Thanks.
Good to have you here. Please tell us about this group, Transition. What is that all about?
Well, our particular initiative is called Transition Greater Brunswick, and it's a movement that's actually worldwide. It's been endorsed by the UN that addresses the three challenges of peak oil, climate change, and economic uncertainty.
And what is peak oil?
Peak oil is, it actually means, it doesn't mean that it's the end of oil, it means at the end of cheap oil. It means we're past peak production worldwide, so that we're in the second half of the world's oil supply. And in the first half, we were using the pure stuff, the easy to reach stuff. And now we're into the stuff that's harder to access, that's less pure, like the oil sands in Canada. It'll cost more money to extract, and eventually, at a certain point, it won't be worth it because we'll be using more energy to get less.
So what you're saying is we are coming to a point where the economy and climate change and oil and fossil fuels are going to make our life a bit more difficult.
Well, it means that the ways that we're doing things are going to make our life more difficult. We're going to need to change.
And so your group Transition Greater Brunswick is offering a alternative vision.
Right. Well, it's all about rethinking and redesigning all of the systems of our area. So that has to do with everything you could possibly imagine. Food production, transportation, education, healthcare, you name it. How we keep ourselves warm.
So let's talk about you for a second. You moved to the Brunswick area just over a year ago.
Right.
Where are you from originally?
I grew up north of Boston in a town called Beverly.
Uh-huh. And then you got into this whole transition movement. How? Tell us a bit about that story.
Okay, well, I was actually traveling. I was enrolled in a master's program in Torino, Italy, and it was a master's in systems design. And being Italian, occasionally the things weren't, it was pretty disorganized, and sometimes professors wouldn't show up. So we'd have weeks off, and I would sometimes go over to England, where I have a number of really good friends, and one of my good friends is an organic farmer in Devon. He lives in Totnes, Devon, and he actually has changed my life twice. And this particular time he said, "So what do you hope to do with the stuff that you're learning in Italy?" And I said that I had this very unformed notion of going back to New England and helping communities get off the grid. And he said, "Well, there's this guy right here in Totnes named Rob Hopkins, and he's doing just that. He's doing something called Transition Towns, and you should go talk to him." So that's how I first found out about it. That was in February of 2007.
What kind of things are they doing there in general?
It's a very new movement. So we're talking about, I think it started in 2005 in Totnes, maybe a little later. And so right now it's a lot of sort of thinking and planning. I mean, Rob chose Totnes because it was the greenest town in the greenest county of all of England. I mean, he chose it with a purpose because it was more likely to be a sure thing. And so when people show up in Totnes expecting to see manifestations of transition, they're not exactly there yet because it's very new. So it's still a lot of talk, a lot of planning. But they're ahead of us in that they have organic farms all around them. We have Bodenham. They have a food forest nearby where somebody has been growing trees that produce and shrubs that produce nuts and fruit for years now, and started to select the ones that grew best in their climate zone. So that they already had that skill set there. Anyway, it's still very new, so you wouldn't see a whole lot if you showed up in Totnes.
Now, this transition movement, is it happening outside of Brunswick too, in Maine?
Yeah, actually, I don't know all of the main towns that are happening. It's happening in Brooksville, in Dexter, I hear. Skowhegan just started. I attended their second meeting. Oxford Hills. Portland has one. I don't think they're meeting right now. And down around Arundel and the Kennebunks. I know that's just a few. There are Also, there's official towns and there are unofficial towns, and it doesn't really matter just as long as you're doing it.
Why did you choose Maine and particularly Brunswick to come and work on this?
Well, Maine is a place that's close to my heart. I have a lot of family up here. I've been traveling and I didn't want to start from scratch. So I wanted to live in a place where I already knew people. And also it was really important to me that places near where my loved ones are would be transitioning because I want my loved ones to be safer. But also Maine is, it's an extraordinary place. It's never going to have a water, well, at least not in the immediate future, going to have water issues, which doesn't give us license to waste our water or sell it to corporations. Also, there are a lot of things, Vermont has the reputation, but there are a lot of things that are happening here in Maine that are really, really interesting. People are independently working on a lot of fascinating projects that are transition related. I wrote more notes about Maine. Oh, there's still that's a lot of it is unspoiled, and that we're still really close to our agrarian roots. Part of it. I chose also Brunswick because of Bowdoin. I think it's really important to have that resource of young minds right there. But also, I hope in the future that there will be more interaction between the college and the town.
Let's talk about what a transitioned community might look like in the future. We talked about kind of the problem ahead of peak oil and economic crisis and climate change. But what does a successful transition town in the vision look like?
Okay, well, what we're talking about is relocalization and building resilience, which means that events could happen externally, but our economy would still be able to function and still be vital regardless, or it would bounce back. That's what resilience means. So that this area would be able to take care of the majority of its needs from within, or
because big trucks hauling goods isn't going to happen.
Well, that's right. I mean, when the oil gets too expensive, or when it starts to run out, and of course the running out will affect the price. The trucks will stop running. It won't make any sense for them to be shipping things to faraway places. So we're going to have to. There are 3 days worth of food. There's a 3-day food supply in the grocery stores at any given time. So we need to be able to start growing our own food, the majority of our food, in this area.
So that means people are going to have to stop mowing their front lawns?
Yeah. There's actually a movement called Food Not Lawns. So people should really start thinking about converting their lawns into gardens and start growing their own food. If they don't have a lawn, they could grow their own food on their porches, or decks, their balconies, their fire escapes, and their roofs, actually. In the city, they're doing that.
And earlier you said that people would do a lot more walking and a lot more bicycling?
Yep, there would be car co-ops and car sharing for those cars that still existed. And hopefully the trains would be running in a much better, more efficient way and connecting us to a lot more towns.
We'd have what they used to have in Maine years ago, commuter rails, so to speak, linking various towns.
Right, as Jim Kunstler, the writer, says, the U.S. has a railway system that even Bolivia would be ashamed of. So, and I heard recently on the radio that our government is starting to invest money in the railway system, but it was from California and to Chicago to Florida. So we weren't included in that, but still that's a really positive sign.
Yeah. And give me some other snapshots of what this transition community would look like.
The big questions for Maine would be, how do we keep ourselves fed and how do we stay warm? So people would have to be building new kinds of houses that actually address this, and re-insulating the old houses. I think the old houses are beautiful. There is also a way of wrapping the houses from the outside, which of course would take away from their beauty. So re-insulating, we'd all have to be conserving energy. We should be doing that now, using less. We don't need as much as we use. And we have the river, the Androscoggin in Brunswick, so we could maybe have micro hydro plants. Apparently the Brunswick Naval Air Base exists there because there's not a whole lot of wind. So we wouldn't be able to use smaller localized wind turbines, but other communities could. And oh gosh, I don't know. Can you think of anything?
Well, you know, one thing comes to mind.
Okay.
Some of these ideas, for example, solar water heaters and a lot of the conservation, the insulation of the homes, for a middle-class person or an upper middle-class person might not be a problem, but for a working-class person or poor people, it could be problematic. How are they going to, where the money's going to come from to help them retrofit their house for conservation? What are we going to, how are we going to solve those problems?
Well, that's a very good question, and it's an important concern. And I think that that's why transition needs to be happening now, before the economy takes a big downturn, which I think there's a good chance that it might. I think that real money has to start being invested for those kinds of people now.
And you know, I'm sort of a Johnny one note on this point.
Yeah.
But I would say one major source of funding for those kind of situations is the war money that we're now spending. $12 billion a month in Iraq and Afghanistan and now into Pakistan. That money could be brought home and used to help poor people and working class people retrofit their homes.
I read somewhere that something like $2,000 a person was spent annually. Is that right? $2,000 a person, which could be brought home and invested locally. And you know, locally, if you invest in local investment, would be great because it would mean a lot more smaller businesses, a lot more jobs, especially if we started working on the green technologies and trying to develop them in this area. Yeah. Apparently, the benefits are huge economically.
Where are you at on wind power? You know, everybody sort of likes wind power, but there's a lot of disagreement about some of the big industrial wind farms. There's a lot of pushback now by many citizens in Maine. Where do you come down on that?
I think it's a solution. I know that from people who lived in Holland, I've heard that Holland's already doing this, that there are problems with corrosion with the seawater. Those big, actually I think Angus King is calling it a wind ranch, those big giant turbines offshore. If the wind is there, we should definitely take advantage of it, but it shouldn't be our only solution, and there should definitely be backups, and all of our wind ranches, it shouldn't just be in one place. It would be very vulnerable, I think, that if we were just concentrating on one source. I see our power and energy sources coming, it would sort of, by the household, it would be patched together probably. Different sources, different things, and there's lots of little solutions that you could start implementing.
What are some of the obstacles that you feel that the transition movement has faced as it's tried to get off the ground?
Well, in the U.S., there's still a lot of people who don't believe in climate change, which I think is astounding. I mean, if you travel at all, there's nobody else in the world that's talking the way we are. There's no controversy anywhere, and really the controversy is in the media. It's not among the scientists or the climatologists. It's in the media. It's totally media created, and I think it was intentional. All this misinformation and disinformation. So I think that nationally, that's an obstacle. I think that the powers that be, all the big corporations, are totally invested in, they call it business as usual, meaning carrying on as we're carrying on. We are slaves to consumerism. We buy all this stuff we don't need, and 98% of it ends up in the landfill, 98%, which it's because it's called planned obsolescence. They intend for things to fail. They create objects that aren't going to work for very long so that you'll be forced to buy a new one, and that ends up in the landfill. So
that kind of consumption is killing the planet, isn't it?
It is, and the planet is finite. All of our resources are finite. So we can't consume the way that we're consuming, and Americans consume way more than, we have 5% of the world's population, and we consume 30% of its resources. And I know people keep throwing out these numbers, but they're real. And we don't need all this stuff. You don't need all this stuff. We don't need to be using what we're using.
Yeah. In your travels to Italy to England to Australia, I believe,
New
and
Zealand.
New Zealand.
Yeah, all around Europe.
What have you seen that people are doing there that you would love to bring home to the United States?
Well, Europe still has everything's still concentrated in neighborhoods, and people buy. All the little shops still exist, so they're not the big box stores. So you can go downstairs and you could go to the little hardware store and the little stationery shop, and you can buy your produce just right there in the farmer's market every day. It's
so you
right
don't
there.
have to drive.
Right, you don't have to go anywhere. That's what we could really take advantage of or emulate, are the sort of thriving piazzas of Italy, and how they're multi-purpose, and the businesses are there, the residences are above them, the people, just a lot of walking, a lot of biking.
And that builds community, doesn't it?
Well, that's what this whole thing is about community, and that idea of working together to create a very positive collective vision of a future that is powered down. That's the word that we use, but meaning using less energy, using renewable energy, and not using so much energy. And it's all about working together.
That's a great vision.
Yeah, well, it could be. It could be if we actually did it. I guess I'd like to see things happening a lot faster, but patience and persistence, I'm finding, is the key.
Well, as you've been working on this transition movement, what has gone better than you expected? Anything in particular?
Well, yes. Well, there are lots of things. I've only been here a year, and so I'm very new to the area, and I'm finding that so many extremely interesting things are already happening here. To name a few, well, the CSA and CSF programs, the community-supported agriculture, but also community-supported fisheries, which is really cool. So people buy shares into these industries and help the farmers and the fishermen. There's lots of cooperatives in the area, which is a different form of business and also more community-minded. There's a young guy who's starting it's called Maine Farm Enterprise Schools, where they're actually teaching young people skills that they could actually use in the future, which would give them jobs, farm jobs. And oh gosh, there's lots of other things. Permaculture, there's lots of permaculture, which is a different kind of, it's sort of a philosophy of living, really, as a lifestyle.
Can you tell us just a little bit what permaculture really is? Okay,
well, it's really hard to define for me, but it's redesigning your property so that it can pretty much sustain the people and the animals that live there, and that once the food forests, the edible forests is what they call it, are established, a lot of the planting is done. It requires a lot less work to maintain it.
Can you give 3 or 4 examples of just kinds of things that in Maine would commonly go into a permacultured yard?
Oh, okay. Well, they also, instead of growing things in rows monoculturally, they grow things in guilds, which are plants that benefit each other. And one of the guilds that is really well known is called Three Sisters. It's corn, which is a heavy nitrogen feeder and very tall. Beans, which take a lot of, which provide a lot of nitrogen and also grow up the corn, and squash, which would provide shade for the roots and keep the moisture in the ground. So these 3 things help each other to grow better.
You could imagine, instead of everybody out on a Saturday or Sunday morning mowing their lawn, they could be out there harvesting, picking beans.
Yeah. Yeah, and you use a lot of vertical space up your walls and over your arbors, and
because gas is getting expensive, we shouldn't keep feeding our lawnmower, should
right.
we?
Well, it's funny. All the conveniences that we use tend to not be terribly good for us, if you think about it. So,
what kind of people so far would you say have been attracted to this transition movement?
Well, it seems the people who get it. I mean, the people who see what's coming, who understand that these changes have to happen, and who just know that if we start preparing now, we'll be in much better shape than if we wait. A lot of Americans tend to want to wait until the crisis comes. I mean, it tends to be what really gets Americans going is the economic issues when it affects their wallet. Then you'll start seeing them making changes, or I guess us, I should say, us making changes.
What do you mean? I read that you use the word beyond politics.
Oh.
What do you mean that these ideas, that the transition movement is beyond politics?
Well, everybody's welcome. I think it's all inclusive. I think that these are much bigger issues than turning it into a political issue would turn people away. And I don't want people to turn away. I want everybody included in this because everybody's going to be affected by this. And I think it's really, really important.
So you don't check party IDs when people come in the door. It's not a party thing.
No, and I try to discourage that kind of partisan talk because I don't want people to be disgusted and leave. I want everybody to be involved in this, or as many people as I can motivate into.
Before the show, we were talking, and you used kind of an expression or a phrase that I thought was very striking. You said, "It's important. This will only work if my neighbor has what I have." What do you mean by that?
Well, in Italy, it was sort of a darker phrase. We would say that whatever you have to make sure that your neighbor has it also, or he'll come and take it away from you. And so really what it means, I mean, if you could flip that into a positive light, it means that it's great that the towns that are transitioning already are transitioning, but really we need every community to be doing this. Every community needs to start redesigning and rethinking their systems and start putting them into place. I mean, that's way more important than just talking about it, is actually making it happen.
So it's a sharing vision.
Yeah.
Sharing of ideas and sharing of hope and sharing of work and bounty.
Right.
But it's all about sharing, isn't
it?
Rather than hoarding.
Right. It's not about doing it yourself or hoarding or becoming sort of a survivalist. It's about doing it ourselves and maybe trading things, bartering over the back fence and helping each other. And for people who have more, helping people who have less. And doing it together, because otherwise it's not going to work. Yeah.
Well, again, we come back to that word community, don't we?
Right.
That seems to be the word. How about a website? Do you have a place where people can find you?
Well, it's not a real website yet. We don't have any money. I mean, all the funding has come out of my pocket so far, and we just started charging for our meetings. But our address, if you Google meetup.com and look for Transition Greater Brunswick, you can join us that way and find out all. And also we keep a calendar of all related events. There's actually a lot of things in the area that are related, that are happening.
So meetup.com.
Meetup.com.
What kind of events do you have coming in the next few months? What are some of the things that you all are working on?
Okay, well, Wolf's Neck Farm is doing a related, they call it the Winter Community Forum, and it's a film and lecture series that is entirely on transition. And they have Bill McKibben coming, who's a very well-known climate change writer and speaker, and a guy named Rob Shetterly, who's an artist from Brooksville, I think. Yeah, he's coming.
He's the guy that does a series of paintings called Americans Who Tell the Truth.
Right, and that's what he's speaking about. And for each speaker, there's a related film being shown at the Frontier Cafe. The Frontier Cafe is an amazing place. They have lots of related events that happen there. We try to include, there are all the reskilling workshops that are happening at Wolf's Neck Farm.
Reskilling?
Reskilling, it's like basic bread making, cheese making, how to make jams, how to can, all the things that we knew just a few generations ago that many people have lost the ability of how to do. So we need to relearn these things, because not only do you have to grow your own food, you're going to have to know how to preserve it. So you're going to have to know about root cellars and how best to store things, how to build and use a solar dryer for fruits and things. Solar-powered freezers, if they exist. We should probably start investing in those. I imagine they probably do exist. So those kinds of things. So food growing is important, but also food preservation is important.
another thing that you spoke about before the show when we were talking was that on the one hand, one of the great skills that Mainers have is the sort of individual ability to do many different things,
Yeah.
compared to a lot of people in the country. But on the other hand, it also it can be a problem at times, because that sort of rugged individualism it leads to kind of a go it alone mentality.
That's right.
When what we need right now is to bring those skills to one another and to create that community. Can you say more about that?
I think you pretty much said it all. Yeah, I think it's really just a mindset. And it's also, and it's different from I, me, mine, which is very American. Talking about stuff, but it's more of an independence and a lot of the people who are in rural Maine are very, very good at fixing things and reusing things, and I think recycling comes natural to them. And naturally, sorry. And also most of those people have had backyard gardens forever, and learned generationally. It's been passed down, and people know how to save seeds and things like that. But what would be great is if they started teaching other people how to do that. And there are a lot of people in urban areas who have forgotten those kinds of things.
Well, Amory, we have about a minute left.
Okay.
And so could you maybe just make a closing statement to the people listening to the show?
A closing statement. Well, I would really love it if we could get more people to start getting involved. And also, I am not the answer person. I'm really, all of the people in all of these different towns who are trying to get these initiatives off the ground are really the motivators. And it's the ideas and the answers need to come from the community. And also, each community has its own wealth of knowledge and its own wisdom. And so that's going to be the resource that we're going to need to tap to make this stuff happen. It's the locals who know way more than I do. So I need more locals to come.
Well, Amory Weld, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you so much
and
for
having me. Good
luck
luck to you. And thank you for watching another edition of This Issue. Until next time, good luck to you all, and please get organized.